did you guys hear about this initiative, this new education initiative that Jay-Z is bringing to Philly? No?
Crickets.
So it has to do with like vouchers, which I think on the surface, when you read the headlines, and especially in like, I hate to use the term mainstream media, but like mainstream media, when you read the headlines, it's meant to like suggest Jay-Z doing something for education, like doing something really amazing. He's going to bring $300 million to education. But the program and the policy that he's backing has to do with like education vouchers. And so the way that vouchers work, vouchers are like this big time right wing like dream, because the idea is that you get basically, in order to get your student a better education immediately, it allows, or it gives folks money for their kids to go to private schools of their choice. And the whole idea is like school of choice. And it's something that the right has like been trying to do to kind of undermine public education for like years and years and years and years, because it like lives on under the assumption that private schools are inherently better than public schools. But really what it's doing is like taking money from public schools, because that money is taken directly from public schools, however much that they get. And most conservative families send their kids to religious schools. And so any voucher program, yeah, it might go to like some private schools, which are not even inherently better. Like private schools, you don't need the same kind of like certification to teach at private schools. Like you don't get paid as much as a teacher to teach at a private school. Like, yeah, there are some like high and mighty private schools that are really well off because they send a bunch of rich kids there. But like generally speaking, just because you go to a private school, it's not inherently better than a public school. But this is really just a way for people on the right to send their kids to Christian schools and like Catholic schools and like religious schools in general on taxpayers' dollars. And so this thing with Jay-Z, it was like seen as like, oh, cool. Like he is going to help secure $300 million. So it's not his own money and it's not Rockefeller's money. He's just going to help to make sure that like this $300 million can be secured to help back this voucher program. And in my eyes, and I think in a lot of people who support public schools' eyes, like that money, like a better way to like use that money would just to put it into public schools. Like $300 million going into public schools would make a massive difference for kids in Philly. And instead, like Jay-Z is backing this program that would basically pull students out of public schools and put them in private schools with the hopes that they get a better education or whatever. And yeah, it's really, as somebody who like has taught at public schools for a long time and has taught at charter schools too, like, which is also a complicated issue. It's like, it's just infuriating to think that, that there's all these systems in place to kind of undermine public education, and like public education is already a shit show, and like we don't need people like Jay-Z like making it even worse by hyping up these voucher programs.
Do you think can they handle that shift of like that? How many students is that going to like move? And like, do these private schools have the capacity to take that many? And then like, how many are going to be left at the public school? Like, what does that look like? Well,
that's one of the big issues with public schools right now is ever since we returned from isolation, a lot of public schools are under-enrolled. And so there's a huge issue with under-enrollment. And what comes with under-enrollment is teachers get fired.
Right.
And worst case scenario, schools get closed. And so another effect of like a voucher program could be teachers getting fired, schools getting closed, like schools getting closed in neighborhoods that probably need schools, like public schools specifically.
So did Jay-Z like give a reason why he was backing this program?
Well, I think like I think it's this idea that like people from like well-off backgrounds, they go like, I send my kids to private school and it's great for them. So like a thing that's going to give other kids opportunities is that give more kids opportunities to go to private school. But the thing that's going to give kids more opportunities is if fucking Jay-Z sends his kid to a public school. Like, and that's like in general, what would help public schools is if more people of means and more people who have power and more people who have influence would send their kids to public school, where they then can use their influence to improve public schools. And I think this happens not only with like people in power, like in people who are rich and stuff like that. I think like middle class white people and middle class like people in general, and well-meaning middle class people, like middle class liberals, they'll move to like, you know, they'll gentrify a neighborhood that they would never send their kids to school in. And then when it comes time to send their kids to school, they either move to a different neighborhood or they send their kids to private school. And like, that's one of the things that really pisses me off is if like you're going to go into a neighborhood and gentrify the city, like send your kids to the public school where you have like some say in improving education and bringing public education to like a neutral means. Because like that's the whole idea of public education, is that like you're supposed to be able to send your kid to a school where they're going to get the same level, the same quality of education no matter where they go. But that's not the case. That's not what's happening.
Yeah, but I guess the funding itself for the voucher program is not inherently taking away money from the public school.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different pool of money. Now, taxpayers like support the voucher programs. You need grants like the $300 million that came from Jay-Z to do it. And so it's almost like it's not necessarily pulling away money that would otherwise go. But I think what's interesting when you look at these programs, it's a lot of times people don't have choice. So you're having a voucher or having that program in place probably opens up doors that maybe otherwise wasn't available. Let's just say if someone has special needs. I'm doing an edge case just to prove the point. But like someone has special needs, but like maybe the public school is overwhelmed and can't give the small class size that someone that maybe is on the autism spectrum needs. And so they can find that at maybe a school where they have a voucher to go to. Maybe that's one example. But I think probably a bigger problem, though, when you think about funding overall, that, you know, you still have the issues of like another avenue of school choice where most public schools are funded by property taxes in the area. Mm-hmm. And so if people are moving to find the schools that, you know, they want to prefer to go versus investing in the community that they're in, those schools aren't able to provide better education. I think another accountability thing would be interesting is, what happens if this, you know, say I use the voucher to go to a school of my choosing, but then leave that school. Does that money still follow me back to my public school? Is that like a double dipping in funding? I think some of the intricacies of that will be interesting, but I definitely hear you around. Are you perpetuating an issue where there's a belief that the public school system is fundamentally broken, and by giving more options to move away from a public school, is that idea of I'm giving a choice to go where you want, is that actually helping? Is that creating a bigger problem?
Mm-hmm.
Stupid question. Who is getting the voucher? Does everyone have access? Is it certain people? Like, how does that?
No, that's a good question. I was wondering.
It's a good question. I guess what I've read and my understanding of it is it depends on the program.
Yeah.
Okay.
So some programs are specifically targeted based on income. So I know Ohio has one where it's there's two. There's an income-based program, and then there's a broader program. Now, I think this is where in Ohio, at least I'm trying to remember, I haven't read about it recently, but one of the big issues with it was in order to get the vouchers, it was pretty difficult. And even who was actually using the vouchers were more middle to high income families. So it was pitched as, we have this low income pool of money, people can use it. But really what it came down to was people that had the means to probably pay for the private schools or the alternate education, then getting additional money, because the voucher then offsets your tuition at maybe a private school. So then it's like you have this, you know, what people would say a welfare system is used by the rich, but then it seemed like, oh, this is fine, this is great. But then you get, you know, people complaining about people on food stamps and stuff saying they're, or you got stimulus checks like, oh, you know, they're just being lazy. It's like, well, you're benefiting from this program and essentially getting to send your kid to school for free. So long story short, I remember that was a big argument when I was living in Ohio, but each state has, and I think there's like 13 states that have it right now, but it depends. Like some states have specifically targeted at low income, others are more equal access, because that's how the legislations were. We can't just give people, you know, we talk about that equity and you know, we need to make it available for everybody, even though it's clearly meant to try to help a certain class of citizen rate, or, you know, meet to the bar and, you know, help push them up versus having it being available for everybody. But it's tough.
It's interesting. It's different depending on the state.
Because it's not a federal program.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it just ends up, I think what ends up happening is, I think it's like a secret way for white families to move their kids out of like schools of color, like in my eyes, like, and because right now, like if you look at the data, schools are more segregated now, or as segregated now, fairly close to before Brown versus Board of Education. Like schools are highly segregated again. And the one time when like the education gap, which I think is a bullshit term, but like this idea of like success rates of kids of color versus like white kids, like when that gap was the smallest, it was when schools were desegregated the most, like in the 70s and the 80s. And schools are now segregated again at rates that are just like astronomical. And this is, like I said, like earlier, the solution for that is for people to send their kids to public schools, and especially like white folks or people who are well off, like middle class and upper middle class folks. Like, but I think the thing that breaks my heart the most is like when I hear people, especially friends, who are like, I don't want to send my kids to that school. It's like not a good school. Like I've heard that so many times, and I try to push people on what they mean by that. And I think, yeah, people might look at test scores or whatever, but what they really mean is like, there's a bunch of kids of color there. And it ends up that by continuing that cycle, like you're further like leaving that school behind. Because the truth is, like, what matters for a kid's success, like what I've seen in my like life as a teacher, is like what matters for a kid's success usually has more to do with like how much a family is able to like give a kid access to certain extra things. Like are their parents taking them to the library or like reading to them at night? Are they able to help them with their homework, like stuff like that? And as opposed to like, oh, they just go to this like really cool fancy school, like and when you're able, like all of us have access, like at this point, like, yeah, we're not like rich or anything, but all of us have access. If we all had kids, our kids are going to do fine no matter what school they go to. Might they have like a better access to like Ivy League schools because they go to like some fancy school on the west side or whatever, maybe. But like all our kids are going to be smart because we have access, and because we're going to read books to them, and because we're going to like make sure that they don't have a lot of screen time, and because we're going to like do all of these things that we know are good for kids, because we have access. And so no matter what school we send our kids to, they're going to be fine. But a lot of people go, that school's not a good idea, and they forget about their own agency in what it means for a kid to have good education.
So do we think that, was there a better use of donating $300 million to support kids? I mean, I guess the idea of what it was trying to do, right, was trying to provide more access or have more support, make sure that kids that maybe aren't going to school or aren't doing well in the areas that they're in have ability to have a choice. Do we think that is a fundamentally flawed logic or idea?
It's interesting because it's not like, I don't know, like it doesn't sound like a horrible thing to be doing, but I understand that it's almost like instead of treating the problem, it's just like moving away from the problem. So I understand the frustration of, instead of like investing in public schools and like actually trying to like build them up, this initiative's just taking more students out of them.
Yeah. And I think that's always like, I think that's the core of so many issues, is like, I try to, it's hard sometimes, but I try to live by the idea that like not to be mad at people, be mad at systems. And like, I don't think I'm mad at Jay-Z, like, but I'm mad at the system that believes that what's better is private schools. And like, and instead of like doing the really hard work of like fixing our school system, because I think that's what the right does all the time, is they figure out ways to fundamentally break public systems so that we lose faith in them and we go to private systems. And like, the problem isn't that public school doesn't work. The problem is that like people have put all these like barriers in place to make sure that public schools fail.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funding issue. And then if you think about the private schools and charter schools and stuff, if you already get money and have money available, whether it be, you know, some states supports all school, you know, get some kind of state funding, even if you're private. Others, you know, you already have tuition. If that means more people can afford the tuition to go there, you can make your school bigger. And then that does take away the funding from that public school. But then, yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing would be, is there a better way to add money to a, you know, under-resourced school, public school, and have that be, you know, add more value? Can we make sure that in the city of Philadelphia, the teachers' salaries are X, or, you know, make working at a public school seem more attractive? Can we, you know, reduce the teacher to student head count? Can we make sure that, you know, all the books are, you know, they have a computer lab? Or, you know, I think something that wasn't as big of an issue in Ohio, but I see it all the time here, of like, you know, you have all these like outdoor facilities. Are they, do they have AC and that kind of stuff? Like, we had COVID. Maybe that gives a voucher for all the kids to have internet at home, because not everybody had internet at their home. I remember hearing about people going to public libraries to do their online classes during COVID because they couldn't go. Like, but then, you know, that was a whole problem. Not everybody has high-speed internet at home because it's not a utility yet. So that could have been one, is like, it's almost like, is that the easy route of saying, hey, here's a pot of money that I know doesn't need to get audited or will get distributed to one singular program, versus if you're donating to the government, then I'm sure it's like, well, the bureaucracy of it is going to get applied evenly. Does that go to every school in the state versus just the city? But I mean, at least everything that I'm aware of, it seems like the challenge with a lot of the public school systems in the areas that are the hardest for the public school is a lack of resources in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Like I can tell you, in my eyes, what I think would be useful for $300 million going to like a public school system, and this is just from experience last year. Like I was working at a school that had 600 and something kids, all from like definitely like all mostly living in poverty for the most part. A big immigration population. And we had a lot of trauma, especially like from COVID times, but even before that, there's like a lot of trauma with our kids who went through shit that I could never even imagine going through at their age. And with all of that, we had one full-time counselor and one wellness center person who was there like half-time. And the counselor almost exclusively dealt with behavior issues. So she was not doing mental health work. And the wellness center person was really just kind of like doing wellness center stuff, which is like he had a room open and would do like fun activities with them and the kids liked them, but like he didn't do like counseling sessions with the kids. And so what I think our school needed more than anything, because I was getting paid well as a teacher, at least here in California, and our salary schedule was more than adequate, I think, which is not the case in a lot of states, but at this district it was. Like, hire 6 fucking counselors. Like, hire 6 counselors to meet with these kids on a regular basis who are dealing with shit that their brains can't fully like manage. We are asking so many teachers in the public school system to be present for kids in a way that they may not be qualified for, that may not be sustainable for them. Mm-hmm. That like, and we are allowing kids to like we're failing kids by just like saying like, or like ignoring this like wealth of trauma that they've gone through over the years, especially kids living in poverty, and we just don't have the resources for them, and it's fucking horrifying.
And also like, and then how do you change that when mental health is like so not in the conversation? I mean, I guess more so now than before, but for kids like post-COVID, I'm like, why wasn't everyone like, let's get a bunch of counselors in here? Because like even the adults couldn't handle post-COVID. Like I don't understand.
There's not enough money for it.
But also there needs to be a shift in like how people view mental health and how important that is to like children's success in education. You know, I mean, I know for me, when I was 15, I was diagnosed with depression, and well, it was kind of it was reversed because my grades were in the toilet, and then my parents were like, "Oh, something's wrong," and then they were like, "Oh, she has depression."
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm laughing. But, you know, it was interesting because I went to private school. There was not a counselor.
Yeah.
And when I returned I was in a mental health facility. And then when I returned to school, there was nothing for me there. I was on all these medications. Like it was constantly changing, and like there wasn't any like plan in place to like tell my teachers what was going on. And so I had to navigate through, like, in the morning I was hyperactive because of the medication I was on, and then I was like, the teacher was like disciplining me because I was like talking too much, and then she took me aside, and then I had to explain to her myself as a 15-year-old kid, like, oh, I'm on this medication that makes me hyperactive in the morning, and like that shouldn't be the case. I shouldn't, as a child, be explaining that stuff to my teachers. like looking back, I really needed support, and I can't imagine how many other kids at my school needed that as well. Like, at least I had therapy on the weekends, but not everybody has that. I don't know.
You're right. And I think that's where some people will use that as an argument for private school of, here's a school that if you're paying for it or they have more money available, they have the resources to maybe you do have the counselors. I know you just shared the story where you didn't, but that is one of the like nuggets of like, look, smaller class sizes, more attention. We have like it's pictured to be like it can be a more tailored and custom solution. But I think what's interesting, depending on where you are and like which township you're in and how your like local school district is funded, like California, I think it's like more equitable across the entire state versus like other states where it's like each individual township like generates the like money for their like local public school. Then you can even see like, I remember like, I'll just use Ohio as example. Like there's certain areas where if you go to the like high schools and stuff like, or even the grade schools and stuff, you're like, oh, these public schools are very, very, very nice. Or I remember we had a swim meet in high school with one of the schools in Indiana, and that's where all the casinos were across the border. You go to that public school, you thought you were at one of the nicest colleges, like multiple gyms, huge stadium, like all these. So like, but they're getting all the money, and like the taxpayers are these big casinos that are paying, income taxes on, and that's going to the schools where they don't have enough things in their budget to spend the money that they're getting. Yeah. And that's where like, so it's not equitable across, and it's not just because you go to public school you'll get it, and just because you go to private school you're not going to get it. And that's, now how do we fix it? I don't know. I'm not smart enough to figure that out yet, but that's where that like lack of resources comes in. And you think something like, oh, let's give everybody a choice to go somewhere else if they need to. Can that help them? Maybe. But if it's harming too many others to do it or not done the right way, you could actually create more situations where you aren't getting the help that you need. And like, it's just, you just got to be mindful about that. And that's talking about help, not the, oh, I want everybody to only get, religious education and make sure that we're not creating a godless country, or, I want to make sure that we're teaching X, Y, and Z values, or making sure that, America having a history of slavery isn't in the libraries, like kind of thing. Like, you can even get us accustomed to that, not just helping the kids in need that are going through development things in their life that having the resource available could have made all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Like, listening to what you were talking about, like my instant thought was like, oh, Jenny needed like a 504 plan. And so there's two systems that are in place at public schools. There's like 504 plans, which are like for people with like health issues, and that can include like mental health issues. And then an IEP is like for students who have disabilities in some way. And something that is so interesting to watch over the last few years is like the comparison between how kids with IEPs and 504s view having those like accommodations themselves, and like how they advocate for themselves at working at a school that has more students of privilege, which is like the school I work at now, versus a school of students and families that come from like poverty and like and less access. And at the current school that I work at, I have so many kids with IEPs and so many kids with 504s who I think if they went to like my other schools that I've worked at, they probably would have never gotten those things, because like it was like fighting tooth and nail to like get families to kind of buy into getting a kid an IEP or a 504 plan, because there like is a stigma attached to it. Yeah. And also like the resources, because if a kid gets an IEP, that means we have to dedicate more resources that we may not have to this student. Like sometimes it means giving them a one-on-one, sometimes it means putting them in a certain class, sometimes it means hiring another ed specialist, like all these things that like we might not have resources for. Versus like working at this school that I work at now, like I have so many kids with IEPs and 504s who advocate for their like accommodations, who advocate for the things that they ask for. And like you get to see like how many kids are more successful because they have these accommodations and are aware of them and know how to use them. And that's like something that I feel like if you had gone to a public school and you had gone to like an okay public school, like, and here's the thing is like, if you go to a school and you see like, oh, why are you getting that accommodation? Oh, it's because I have a 504 plan or I have an IEP, and you have people who like feel comfortable talking about those things, like that might make you go like, oh, that sounds like I feel like I need that. Mm-hmm. Like, who do I need to talk to get that thing? And then you go to whoever, like the person in charge of like disability services or whatever, and talk to them and get your 504 plan, your IEP, or like advocate for it, versus a school where folks are living in poverty and they don't have much access and they don't have as much like knowledge of like how those systems work. And like what ends up happening is like it makes it easier for like a school to not give kids what they need, because so many like, I don't know, so much shit has to be gone through to like get kids these services. And I had so many kids last year, so many kids in my history of teaching, that I'm like, this kid probably would benefit from having an IEP or a 504 plan, and they're fucking juniors in high school, and like they probably should have gotten it when they were in 6th grade or like earlier, and they don't have it. And you think about like the way that their life in school could have changed if they had just like gotten those resources like earlier on. But there are so many roadblocks to getting kids what they need, whether it's like the cultural stigma that comes with it or the like systems in place that make it really hard to get those things.
We'll see you guys on the next topic.
This conversation is making me so sad.
That was the test closing.
Sorry.
Well, you didn't start this podcast for giggles and laughs.
It's true, and I haven't gotten any.